As a young kid, all I've ever wanted to do is fly in my entire life. And of course, when the movie Top Gun came out, I knew that that's the life that I wanted. It's the one thing that I've just always known that was in my blood that I've wanted to do. And I just knew it would be a great experience for me. And I went off to college, and I spent about 3 years in college, and I was eating ramen noodles and just kind of broke and, you know, in a lull a little bit. And I went and talked to a recruiter, and he kind of sold me on the high speed and the adrenaline and everything. And I ended up going off and joining the Army to fly helicopters. And the first time I ever flew in a helicopter is when I was in flight school after about 3 months of even being in the Army. And it was exactly what I expected. It was the experience that I wanted in my life, and it's probably one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me in my life. I'm Ron Young. I'm one of 5 kids. My father and mother, Kay and Ronnie Young, gave birth to me January 10th, 1977. Of course, I came home. At that time, I had 2 brothers. My younger brother and younger sister came, my younger brother a year after me, and then my younger sister a year after him. So we were very close in age. So growing up in the Young household was just, it was kind of a crazy circumstance because you had 5 kids running around. 3 of us were in diapers at the same time. You know, there was a lot going on all the time. My parents are real loving, they're very kind, they've always had me involved in church, and of course when I was old enough they got me involved in other programs and of course scouting. I'm a middle child, so I'm kind of someone who strikes out, you know, away from the family and everything. I'm the only person who has ever even moved away from my family in Georgia. The first time I got into an Apache, I was at a stage area, and it was going to be my first flight, and I climbed in with my instructor pilot, and of course we're running the aircraft up, and as we do, we crank the first engine. Before this, I'd only flown in single engine helicopters. That's what we learned in. But I got in the aircraft and we started running up the engine, and we lit the first engine off, and of course it starts spooling up, and then you have another engine to go to, and we light that one off and it's spooling up, and the next thing you know, you're taking both power levers of the engines to fly. And as you do, it's just the torque in the engine is unreal, and as you push it to fly, it's like the rotor blades start going faster, and you could feel the fuselage of the aircraft kind of twist under the pressure and the torque of the drivetrain in the aircraft. And I mean, it was just the most exciting thing that had happened to me. So exciting, actually, that I took off and we went around the backside of the traffic pattern. And we do in the military what's called a high-low G, so you can get used to the G loads on the rotor and what your limitations are. And of course, when you pull in G's, it makes you sink into your seat. And as we went in, we did the low G, and of course we went straight into the high G, which means you come up and, you know, you push down on the cyclic and it kind of throws you out of your seat. And I was so excited that I forgot to put on my seat belt, so I was plastered against the top of the canopy and had to push myself off the canopy. And that was my first flight in the Apache, and it was a great one. Being in the military and fighting for freedom is kind of something that I've always thought that I've wanted to do since I was a child. I've watched videos, TV programs and things of wars, and I just thought that was something that I felt was very honorable to do, and it's something that I've wanted to do my entire life. My grandfather was in World War II, and of course my father was in Vietnam, so I've always grown up for a deep respect for the military and what they've done for all of us. And of course after 9/11, everyone in the military was mad about what had happened to us, and we all wanted to go overseas and fight, and we felt like it was our duty to protect this country. And we went over, and I spent about a month and a half in Kuwait before the war kicked off. That day we took off from Kuwait and we flew up into Iraq, and we landed our aircraft and we took on more fuel and everything and got ready for the mission. And of course we waited for the sun to go down, and we were going to take off and we were going to conduct our mission at night. And as we flew up toward Karbala, all of a sudden we kind of knew something was wrong, because all the aircraft that were in front of us were already being shot at, and we were only 3 minutes behind them. I never really made it up into the engagement area where we were supposed to, take care of the enemy. As we got up there, I mean, the entire sky was just open with tracer rounds, and we were shot down. We landed in a farmer's field. We lost an engine and part of our flight control system, and by the time we gained control of the aircraft, we were so low and we were flying so slow that we couldn't continue flight on one engine. And we put it down, and immediately I jump out of the aircraft and I run about 20 feet, and I mean, we have nothing to do but run across the ground, start trying to evade and keep the enemy from capturing us at this point. And we're running, and Dave stops after about 20 feet. He starts going, I can't. He had taken a round across the top of his foot. And I run over to him, and I pull him up in my face, and I'm trying to instill the fear of God in him like I had in me at this point. And I start screaming at him, Dave, you gotta run! You gotta run, Dave! And I put him back down, and we take off running. And as we're running, I look over at Dave, and he has a lip light on his helmet, and it's a high-intensity yellow light that sits right in front of your microphone boom, and it's so that we can see things in the cockpit without having to turn up ambient cockpit lighting. But I look over at him, and this lip light's going on and off, basically beaconing to the enemy where we're at, and I push him to the ground. I pull the cord out of the back of his helmet, I pull him back up, and we take off running again. He looks over at me, and he goes, your lip light's on. And these are the unbelievable things that are happening to you in a situation like this, where Dave and I are very close to losing our lives. And we continued running until we came to this little ditch, and we got down in it, and of course it put us below the enemy to where they're shooting over the top of us, and we took off our helmets and we throw them. We could hear the Iraqis, they're still shooting in our direction, and of course we could get up a little bit and we could see the muzzle flashes. And we take off our helmets, of course, and throw them. And we pull out these radios and we try to talk, trying to contact someone to let them know where we were at and what our situation was so that they could come and they could help us. And I turn on the radio, and the first thing I hear is pilots, my friends, people I've known for a long time, and they're yelling and they're on the radios and they're trying to call one another, figure out what's going on. And it's apparent that the whole situation, not only for us, but the rest of them is just as bad for them as it is for us. And of course the radio traffic's so intense, everyone on the radio at once, that we can't get through to anyone and we can't let them know what's happening to us. So we get up and we decide that we have to move further away, and we move further to the south, and we get down in the weeds and we pull back out our radios and we start trying to contact people again. But this time I can hear Iraqis talking on the radios, and they're going, we hear you, we hear Americans, we hear you Americans. And I'm thinking to myself, who talks like this? And it's, of course, the Iraqis on the radios with us, and it just made the desperation seem that much more, that there's no way we were going to make it out of there. We've been flying across the sky getting shot at. We've been shot down. We're running across the ground. The Iraqis are already shooting at us. And now they're talking to us on the radio, meaning basically our world's closing in that much more. So Dave and I got up, and the problem with being in a helicopter is when you go down, you're at the scene of the crash. In a jet, where people eject out, the airplane will go down miles and miles away from where the person hits the ground with the parachute on. And for Dave and I, when we hit the ground, we're right there with the helicopter. So once the Iraqis find the helicopter, they know we're in the general area, and they know basically about how long we've been running. So they can track us fairly easily. So we know we have to keep moving, and we came up to this irrigation ditch, and we decided to put something between us and the enemy to our back. And we swim this irrigation ditch and get up on the other side on this road, and we're looking, and right in front of us, we're of course headed south, everyone friendly is south, but right in front of us is this pond. So it means either we have to go to the east around the pond or to the west. And we look to the east, and there's lights, and it's kind of built up, so of course we're going to head to the west. And as we're running down this road, one of our helicopters, we can hear it off in the distance, headed our direction toward the south. and it flies over the top of us. And as it does, we're kind of waving to him, and we're trying to get him to see us and to stop, and we pull out our radios and we try to contact him. But at this point, he didn't have radios. He had been shot up so bad he was missing probably most of his electrical power. And he continues out on the horizon, and he's gone. And as Dave and I keep moving down this road, all of a sudden we hear an explosion. And I look up toward the sky, and it's one of our helicopters, and it's on fire, and it's flying right in front of the moon out on the horizon. And probably about 7-8 miles out, all of a sudden we see what looks like the helicopter goes down, and it hits the ground. We see this huge explosion come up in front of us, and you know, it was unbelievable, because it really shook you. It showed you firsthand that people you knew were losing their lives out there, you know, and that Dave and I were very close to losing our lives at the same time. But we kept moving down this road, and knowing that the enemy's getting closer to us. They're driving vehicles, and we're seeing them, and we're trying to hide behind these banks and things like that. And all of a sudden, the enemy to our front catches a glimpse of us, and they start shooting at us, and we run down, and we jump back down in the irrigation ditch, and we started swimming the opposite direction. And the problem is once we got back in this water, I mean, it was nice in the beginning when we had been running, we were hot, and we were very exhausted, and we got in the water, and it felt good and cool, and we were below the enemy. They couldn't really see us, and we could hide ourselves up to about our nose as we moved through this water. But as time went on, the water was probably about 60-65 degrees. It became bitterly cold, I mean, more and more cold over time, and we started getting into danger of going into hypothermia, to where we're just shaking uncontrollably, and we have to make a decision whether we're going to sit here in the irrigation ditch and risk losing our lives that way, you know, due to hypothermia, or whether we're going to get out and take our chances with the enemy. And after a while, we didn't even have a choice. So we got out, and we got on back up on that road, and we crossed over to where that lake I was talking about was. And we have about another 75 yards to make it. We're at a 90-degree bend back toward the south, and we have another 75 yards to make it before we're in kind of a tree line, more like a palm tree line. And it would have made our evasion a little bit easier. And as we're making this 90-degree bend and we're headed that direction, Dave pushes me to the ground. He starts going, "I heard somebody, I saw something. And I'm just like, "Are you sure? And he's like, "Yeah, just don't move." So we're sitting there, and all of a sudden over this hill you start seeing these heads bob up. And I have a 9mm pistol in my hand, and Dave and I start talking, and it's like, "What do you want me to do, Dave? Do you want me to start shooting at them?" I mean, these are Iraqis. They have fully automatic AK assault rifles, 50 round clips taped side by side. I mean, they would basically murder us in a firefight, especially me just having a 9mm pistol with 15 rounds. Or we can take off running. The problem with that is the enemy's just going to shoot us in the back. Or our other option is to give ourselves up. And Dave and I made the decision right then and there that the only choice we had if we wanted to make it out of this situation alive was to give ourselves up. And Dave started waving at the enemy, you know, to kind of let them know where we were at and that we weren't meaning them any harm. And honestly, at this point, I don't think they really got who we were. They probably thought we were Iraqis, or, you know, part of the army, the Iraqi army or something like that, because it was night and it was hard for them to see us. But as they got closer to us, you know, they're being very cautious, and they have their weapons drawn down on us. They could tell that we were Americans, and they start yelling at us and screaming. And of course we got down in the mud, and we're laying on our faces in the mud there. And they keep yelling. And as they're yelling, I look over at Dave, and I'm like, I think they want us to get on our knees. So we got on our knees with our hands out, and they started yelling louder. So I said, "Dave, I think they want us to stand up." So we stood up, and one of them shot at us at point blank range. And of course we hit the ground, decided then and there if they wanted us, they could come and get us. And this guy walks over toward me, and he has, of course, a weapon drawn down and everything. He hands it to another guy, and then he takes his shirt and he takes this knife out and he starts cutting up his shirt to tie Dave and I up. And he walks over to Dave and he starts tying Dave up, and another guy came around the side of me and he starts cutting up his shirt. And of course he comes around and starts tying me up. And another Iraqi walks over to the side of me and takes the butt end of his rifle and he hits me across the back of the head with it. And when I came back to, of course he knocked me unconscious. When I came back to, I'm staring straight into Dave's face right beside me, and they have him by the front of his head with his head up with a knife to his throat, threatening to cut his head off. And of course, I don't understand Arabic. And it was probably the most intensely frightening time of the entire experience in captivity and everything, because I mean, here you were in a situation where we didn't know what these guys were going to do. They beat us there on the side of that bank, and then they took us to this house, and we're thinking, you know, they're just going to mutilate us in this house. And you don't really know what their intentions are. You don't know if they're going to torture us. I mean, the entire time we didn't know if they were going to torture us. And it was such a feeling, I mean, it was an overwhelming feeling, almost to the point to where you almost couldn't be scared, because it was so surreal what was happening to you that your mind couldn't even comprehend it. You didn't even have any concept of actually what was happening. I mean, it took me a few days of sitting in captivity in a prison to actually even sort it out, really. But the Iraqis took us to this house, and they took a lot of things from us, personal effects, items, you know, that they wanted from our survival gear. And then they took us to downtown Karbala, where the Iraqis started the interrogations. And from there, we ended up in a prison in downtown Baghdad. And by the time they put me in this prison, I'd been up for 3 solid days. And they stick me in the cell, and of course, I mean, I'm completely out of it. And the next morning, I wake to this explosion. A jet had dropped a bomb on this compound that we were on, of course, because I'm staying on a military compound in downtown Baghdad. You know, and this all happened, and this was the 3rd day of the war. So the Iraqis took us up to downtown Baghdad and put me into this prison cell. And of course, this is about the 5th day of the war, so the shock and awe phase is really heavy in downtown Baghdad by this point. I've been up for 3 days, and the next morning I wake to this explosion where a jet had come and dropped a bomb on one side of the compound. And of course, this gun on the roof of the prison that I was in starts shooting at this jet. And the jet dropped another bomb on the other side of the compound, and then of course it was gone. And while this gun was shooting at this jet, we were in a prison with a tin roof, and the tin pieces are coming apart, and they're just slapping together, making this loud clanging noise, and the concussion inside my cell is unbelievable from this guy shooting. And I get up, and I get in the middle of the cell, and I get on my knees, and I just start praying. I prayed for about 12 straight hours that day, you know, not just so much that I would live through it, that, you know, that the Iraqis wouldn't torture us, and if I was going to die, it'd be swift and painless, and then of course my family would know how much I loved and cared about each of them. And you know, I just didn't have the greatest feeling on earth at this point, like I was going to live through it, like I felt anything, like I knew anything, like the Lord was speaking to me or anything like that. And this went on for a couple of days, you know, praying and being bombed and things like this. And the Iraqis finally came around to each one of our cells and started asking us if we were Catholic or Jewish. And of course, I'm not Catholic or Jewish, so I told them no, I wasn't. And they go around to this one guy's cell and they ask him if he's Catholic or Jewish, and he goes, no, I'm not Catholic, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Hindu, I'm not Buddhist, I'm nothing, no God. And he's basically sitting here saying that he doesn't believe in God in a situation where all we have is a blanket, 4 concrete walls, and God. I mean, we're isolated in these cells alone. And as he says this, I move closer to the door, and I can hear the Iraqi telling him, no, you got to believe in a God, some God. And he's like, no, I don't believe in a God. And they're arguing. But at this point, all of a sudden, I just felt like everything was going to be okay. I felt calm. I felt like, you know, like the Holy Spirit was talking to me, and that I knew for sure that I was going to live. And I kept praying over and over for days after this, you know, Lord, am I really going to live through this? And every time I felt like the answer was truly yes, you know, that he was talking to me and saying, yes, you're going to live through this. Everything's going to be fine. I can't even explain how reassuring that was to have in my life at all. Especially in a situation like this. But days went on, and you know, each one's more surreal than the last. The bombing's becoming more intense, and we can hear tanks, and the Iraqis start moving us down through downtown Baghdad, trying to keep Americans from finding us. And they put us in this house, and they put 3 of us in a room together, and I knew I was in this room with one of the guys that said he didn't believe in God. And we're kind of getting acquainted and everything, and finally I got around to, you know, which one of you guys said you didn't believe in God? And of course the guy that said it, you know, kind of raised his hand and everything. And then the burning question I'd really had on my mind for a long time is, how can you not believe in God at a time like this? And I asked him that, and he started to answer me. He's like, well, you know, I'd be willing to just about believe in anything, and you know, at this point. And A-10 rolls in, and one of his missiles hits a house pretty close to ours, and it blows debris all over the side of our building. And all of a sudden another A-10 rolls in behind him with a 30mm cannon, and he's setting rounds down a street. And I dropped to the ground where I was at and moved closer to the wall, you know, kind of covering ourselves. And this guy kind of hit the ground, and he rolled over. And I can remember looking over at him. He's kind of in the fetal position with his head pointed toward the ceiling. He's just going, God, please, please, God, please. And I yelled over to him, I'm like, "What God are you praying to?" And his answer was, "Whichever one will listen." And I just couldn't understand that it took that much before someone would actually, invite God into their life and, feel like they needed some help from somewhere besides themselves. And I've lost quite a few friends so far over in Iraq. One of them was one of my best friends, Aaron Weaver, and he was killed, and he was taken away from a wife and 2 children who loved him dearly. And that's something that's hard to see, and for me it's kind of hard to deal with, because I think, why me? Why was I one that came back? Why? And I have a great respect for a lot of veterans who have gone before us. My father was in Vietnam, and of course he received a Purple Heart for wounds received, and there's a lot of guys throughout our country that have done it. There was no guarantees, and they were very brave people, and they really sacrificed a lot so that all of us could be here today. And that's probably one of the things that I think about most, is a lot of the guys who have lost their lives and the type of people they were. And it's probably one of my more fond memories also, because I can always look back and know that there were a lot of guys, a lot of great guys who were out there. When I was rescued, we were rescued up in Samara. We had been in this house. It was all 7 of us together in this one room, and I guess some Iraqi outside kind of had heard that we're in this particular area and went and told some American troops about it. And these American troops didn't know if they were going into an ambush or, what was happening. Of course, they knew that there were 7 POWs that were out there that needed to be rescued. But they made the decision, if there was something funny going on, or if there was a way that they could possibly rescue us, that, they were going to go in and they were going to do everything that they possibly could. And this one particular morning, I'm sitting in this chair, and all of a sudden I start hearing this commotion outside. And I start hearing this guy kicking on the door, trying to kick it in, and he kicks it about 3 or 4 times. And we start hearing him yelling, "Get on the floor, get on the floor." And of course it's in English, so I'm like, okay. So I get down on the floor, and as I'm sitting there, Shoshana Johnson's sitting right in front of me, and she's sitting in a chair, and I'm like, "You might want to get down on the floor." And she's like, "I don't have to, and I'm an American." I'm like, "They're not going to care when they come through that door." And I'm laying on the floor, and she starts to get down. As she does, another guy runs through the door, a Marine Corps guy, and grabs her by the back of the head and pushes her to the ground, starts sliding her across the floor on her face, basically. And then I look over, and the Iraqis are in the fetal position, which was particularly nice for me. I mean, it was kind of fun in a lot of ways, just looking over there and seeing them in the same position that Dave and I and the rest of us have been in. From there, they took us out, and they threw us in the back of these armored vehicles, and then drove us down, secured the school. And it was just amazing to see their faces, because you could tell that they had no idea that they were going to find us. And they said basically that we had made the war for them. Being able to rescue us was the best thing that they had done the entire war up to that point. I was able to overcome my adversity through God. Of course, I sat in a prison cell with 4 concrete walls and a blanket and God, and there's always somewhere you can turn to, and that's to God, especially in a situation like I had. I mean, I was for 14 solid days isolated by myself. And, it's one of those things that's always comforting to know that there's always somewhere to turn. It's very important to be true to yourself and to not waver in what your convictions are. There are a lot of people who go through military services and other type of services, and they go in and they come out and they're either happy with what they did in certain situations, or they come out and they feel like they're a lesser person. They always hold their head in shame. And I challenge you to hold your head up and to make sure that you're making decisions for the right reason. Because, the people who are really going to benefit from what you do in your life is your family and your family name. And when people look at you, you want them to know that you were the type of person that would stand up to people if you had to. There's kind of a poem, and part of it is, that people will forget your death and birth, like the date you were born and the date you died, but they'll never forget your dash. And that's true. People will never forget what you did in your life. They may forget the exact birth date that you had, but they'll never forget the legacy that you left here on earth. Freedom's something that we have in this country that a lot of countries don't have, and it's something that you'll never truly value as much as you could until you start traveling around the world and you realize the conditions that most of the world really lives in, and how bound they are by their government and the things that they're able to do. You know, they can't just leave their country and travel to another country if they wanted to. They don't even have the freedom to express themselves the way we can. And you know, it's due to the sacrifices from a lot of soldiers that have allowed us to be able to do that. And it's something that we cherish as Americans, but we also kind of take for granted. And you know, it's very important to be a patriotic person and to really believe in your country, because this is the best country in the world. Being an Eagle Scout to me is a very important part of my life. It's actually something that the military recognizes, and I was awarded rank while I was in basic training for being an Eagle Scout. It's something that I've carried with me my entire life, and it's something that I've always been proud of. You know, the Army's core values of honor, integrity, duty, selfless service, loyalty, and respect in a lot of ways resemble the Scout law. And you know, it's very important that you understand what all these different values are and that you institute them into your life, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have to trust someone with your life and you know that they're not the person that you can trust with your life. Being even thrifty and brave and clean and reverent, all those values are very important, and it's something that you should strive to be, and you should absolutely strive to be an Eagle Scout. Basically, I'd like to be remembered, I guess, as someone who wasn't scared to do what was right in really bad circumstances, but it was more important that I protect the soldiers around me than my life. You know, sometimes you have to be the person who sacrifices yourself so that other people should be able to live a better life or things like that. I mean, that's what being a part of a family is all about. That's what being a father is all about. That's what being a grandfather is all about, is making sacrifices in your life so that other people can have a better life.